Good morning. We're in John 11. John 11:35. 2 words, 9 letters in the original Greek, 0 exclamation points. Not even a period. Jesus wept. By the way, this is the best day in the world to have scripture reading. Jesus wept. Have you thought about why? I figure we'll just jump right in this morning because you probably know the verse. If you ever have had to memorize a memory verse, this is the one. Jesus wept. But why did Jesus weep? That's the question that I would like for us to think about today. On the front end, let me say, this is a little different. Typically, when I preach a sermon, I want to challenge you and give you a little something to work for. This sermon's not like that, I don't think. I don't think it's going to go that way. We'll see. I think this may be more of a comfort kind of sermon, and we need that at times. Even though we don't admit that we need that at times, I think we need that. We are a culture that, in a lot of ways, has lost the ability to be sad. We're a society that, in a lot of ways, I think, has lost the art of lament, of saying things are really bad right now, and I don't like it. If you notice what we do in our culture is we try to dress most things up. We take bad experiences and we try to find the silver lining in that and try to move right past it and act like it doesn't hurt. But it does hurt. Or we try to take a situation that we wish we did not have to deal with in our own life, in our family's life, with something with our friends or at work, and we just try to act like it's all right when it's not. It's not okay. And we don't say it's not okay. We just act like everything's going to be fine. It'll all work out. Maybe it will. I don't know. But it's not okay. And we sometimes have lost the ability, the talent of lamenting a bad situation. This shows up in John chapter 11 at a graveside. This is a story about death. And I know that's not an upbeat kind of thing to lead off with, but it's where we are in John chapter 11. Not only does our culture not deal with sadness well, we don't deal with lament. We don't lament anything really. We don't really know how to deal with death, I've learned, in our culture. We want to ignore it. We want to not speak of it. We sometimes want to rush past it, act like it didn't happen. We don't even use the word. We have shorthand for it. Better place, past. We don't even talk about what has really happened sometimes. We try to make peace with it, and I understand why, and I think you understand why we try to make peace with it. We got to move on. But what if we are trying to make peace with something that was never supposed to exist in the first place? What if we're trying to make peace with something that is the enemy? Did you know that death is the enemy? Paul writes this great passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and it's all about life. But it's all about life that comes after death, which sounds so strange to us in our world. We're also a culture that has kind of figured everything out scientifically, and life after death, how in the world is that supposed to work? Well, Paul writes a whole chapter about it, and he has this idea of resurrection, of life after the grave, which doesn't sound probably groundbreaking to those of us who may have grown up in church, but if you didn't grow up in church, that's crazy, isn't it? It's always been crazy to think that somebody could die, literally die, and rise from the grave. And Paul has this chapter, 1 Corinthians 15, where he talks about if we don't believe in this resurrection idea, then our faith is useless. Then we are, of all the people in the world, the most pitiable of all people if we have believed this thing that doesn't really exist. And in the middle of that chapter in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 26, he says, the last enemy is death. The last enemy to be defeated is death. Death is an enemy. Death is not something to make peace with. Death is not something that should be part of life. It is part of life. It is part of what we do. It's our existence. But in the beginning, it was not so. It was not that way. And I'd like for us to talk about that idea. Death is an enemy, not an inconvenience, not a natural part of life, an enemy, the last enemy, but a defeated enemy, as we will see. Did you know Jesus had feelings? We're going to talk about some of those feelings today, but Jesus has emotion in his life. It's impossible, if you've ever read Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, it's impossible to come away thinking that Jesus is aloof or that he is distant from the suffering of people, but it's not just the suffering of people. Jesus has emotions. You can read through his life and you can see the emotion of love on every page. You can see that Jesus loves even his enemies at times. You can see in John chapter 11, in fact, it's spelled out for us in the first 5 or 6 verses that Jesus loves this family that he's going to encounter. He loves Mary, he loves Martha, he loves Lazarus. When the Jews remark about his tears in verse 36, they talk about how much he loved him. Jesus is a man who has emotion, and one of those emotions is love. He's also a man who experiences joy. It's not all sadness, it's not all grief. He doesn't just weep at the state of affairs in the world. Jesus has joy in his life. Do you ever notice all the times that Jesus goes and has a meal at somebody's house? Those are joyful times. Do you notice the times that Jesus practices the discipline of celebration in his life? He celebrates when good things are happening with his disciples and with people who just come to him and report about good things that have happened. He celebrates with those people. He has joy. He's a man that, although he was targeted from day one, people wanted to kill him from day one, he's a man who enjoys peace. You read about this whenever you see in a storm on a sea and he's the only one asleep in the boat. He's at peace. All the storms of life around him, he's not immune from those things. He suffered through those things. But he found a way to have peace with those things. And so he has love and he has joy and he's got peace. But there are also times he looks at people and he feels compassion for those people. You read sometimes in the Bible that Jesus looks at somebody who's falling on hard times and he looks at them having compassion. That's a gut feeling. That's what we would probably call today maybe sympathy, probably more likely empathy. He feels deep down for those people. He has compassion. There are times when Jesus is irritated. We may even read that in John chapter 11, that Jesus experiences some sort of deep, moving irritation. When there was a man who had a withered hand and a lot of folks said, you can't heal that guy. It's Saturday, it's the Sabbath day. You can't heal on the Sabbath day. Jesus looks at those people with anger. He's irritated that they are getting in the way of the work of God for that person. He's a man of emotions, and irritation is one of those. He's a man who feels distress. That's an emotion, anguish at times. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he is anguished. He deals with worries. He sweats drops of blood because he experiences the emotion of distress, of anguish. There's relational pain in his life. He had a friend named Judas, and Judas is the one who betrays him. And there's an emotional pain, a relational pain that happens there. Jesus also experiences sadness. He weeps. He weeps over entire groups of people. He weeps over entire cities when he looks over them, and he weeps at what could have been for them. And he weeps in John chapter 11 at the grave of a loved one. Jesus is not a stoic. He is not removed from his emotions. He does not manage his emotions at a distance from everybody else. He's human. He's a person. He feels. He can sympathize with your weaknesses and with my weaknesses because he has experienced what every one of those weaknesses feels like. And he experiences some of those pains and emotions in John chapter 11. All right, let me give you a quick summary of the first 30 or so verses. Jesus is not where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus live at this point. Lazarus is his friend, Mary is his friend, and Martha is his friend. He visits with them occasionally, and he teaches them lessons when he shows up at their house. On this day, he's not there. Lazarus has become sick. They have sent word to Jesus, who is a couple of days' journey away. They've sent word to Jesus that your friend Lazarus is sick. And Jesus does nothing when he gets the message. And for about 2 days, he does nothing when he gets that message. He has emotions, and he does nothing yet. He waits 2 days, and then he says, our friend Lazarus is sick, and we must go to him. By the time Jesus gets to their town, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Mary and Martha come out to meet Jesus, and they say, both of them say, Lord, if you'd been here, our brother would not be dead. Lazarus would still be alive if you would have been here. And I don't know what you read into that. You can read sadness into that. You can read into that Mary and Martha are just making declarative statements. This is true. If you had been here, you could have healed him with no emotion attached. I don't read it that way. You're free to read it that way. I read it with a little bit of anger. Had you been here, everything would have been fine. You could have come. In fact, you didn't even have to come here. You could have healed him when you got the message from a distance, and he would be okay, and he's not. I think there's emotion there. Mary and Martha, they experience emotion as well. And so let's pick up reading here in John chapter 11, verse 28. When she had said this, she went and she called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and he's calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him, and Jesus had not yet come into the village. He was still in the place where Martha had gone out to meet him. And when the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep there. That's what they'd expect. Brothers died, you're going to go weep. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. I want to come back to that verse. Those are two emotional words that we're going to dive into in just a minute. Not yet, though. Let's get to the sad ones first. He says in verse 34, where have you laid him? And they said, Lord, come and see. In verse 35, Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. There's sadness here. And it's an interesting sadness from my point of view. Because there are things that Jesus already knows. By the time he shows up at the village, he already knows what's going to happen. Mary is sad because she doesn't know that Lazarus will soon rise from that tomb. Martha is upset because she doesn't know either that Jesus is about to bring Lazarus back from the grave. They don't know what's about to happen. Jesus knows what is about to happen. He has already said this is not a sickness that goes to death. Right? He knows that this is going to be okay. But he's sad. He's weeping. Even though he knows what's going to happen. So why in the world is Jesus upset on this day? He knows Lazarus is going to come back. He knows that ultimately in the end, heaven is the ultimate goal. He knows that one day the new heavens and new earth is going to show up and Lazarus is going to be just fine on that day. But on this day, Jesus is upset. He doesn't arrive on the scene and go ahead and stop everybody's emotion. Don't we do that sometimes? Hey, it's okay. We might have said, Lazarus is in a better place. He's better off now. Our well-meaning selves may have said something like, well, the Lord needed Lazarus. But that's not what Jesus says, and that's not what we should say either. What Jesus does is he goes and he enters into their grief. They're sad, and Jesus shows up, and Jesus is sad. He doesn't tell them to get their act together, to stop crying because it's all going to be okay. He enters into their pain, into their situation, and he becomes a mourner, just like all of them. Jesus enters into their humanity. He doesn't give them a platitude that says it's all going to be all right. You may have a picture of God that does not include tears. We can do this. We can have that picture of God if we think of God as just powerful, waiting to strike us down, waiting to call us out whenever we mess up. But that is not the God that you read about in the Bible. That is not the God that you see displayed in Jesus. Jesus is God weeping at a grave. And until we put away our detached, unmoved pictures of God and replace them with a creator weeping over what has become of his creation, we will not understand who God really is. This is who God is. This is God becoming a man of sorrows, well acquainted with grief. That's the prophecy of Isaiah 53 anyway. This is not just a God who is well acquainted with grief and that knows a little bit about grief. This is a God who is present in the grief. His people are mourning and he is mourning. He is in this situation with these people. Jesus weeps because the people around him are weeping and he is human, just like they are. Sadness is not the only emotion that you read about here. There's an interesting word all the way back in verse 33. And it's a word that is difficult for us to translate sometimes. This is where we read in verse 33 that Jesus was deeply moved in his spirit and he was greatly troubled. There's an interesting word behind the English word here. I'm not going to try to pronounce that Greek word, but it is the word that the Greeks would use for a snorting warhorse. You know the emotion that you just make that kind of sound? That's the emotion behind the word in verse 33. It is not sadness. It is a word that outside of the Bible, people used in the Greek culture to describe some kind of anger or irritation. And so when you read verse 33, you may be able to say this. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews had come with her also weeping, he was angry in his spirit and greatly irritated at this. And well, now we got a problem, because if Jesus is angry at something here or someone here, if Jesus is irritated at something here, if he's distressed by something or someone in John chapter 11, who is it? What's he upset about? What is Jesus angry about? Let me tell you what it's not, first of all. He is not angry at Mary for being upset about Lazarus. Sometimes I've heard people read into this that Jesus is upset and mad that these people are weeping because don't they trust in God? That is not what's happening here. Jesus is not mad at Mary. He is not mad at Martha. Jesus is not upset with the mourners who were mourning dead Lazarus. That's not what's happening here. Jesus is not mad at Lazarus for dying. Jesus is not upset with God for allowing this to happen. He is God. He's not upset with God. Jesus is angry at death. Because death is why Mary is upset. Death is why Martha is upset. Death is why the entire community is gathered here to be upset, because Lazarus is no longer with them. There is anger, there's distress, there's irritation here, not at any human, because our fight is not against flesh and blood, is it? No, it's against the powers. It's against the principalities. He is angry at death. He is angry at the wreckage that death leaves behind in life. He is angry because God made this world and called it good. It's a world that is designed for life. It is a world that is designed for people to flourish and to grow, for peace. But he's mad that it has been invaded by an enemy that was never supposed to be here. And the enemy is death. It is not something to make peace with. It is not something to be okay with. In Paul's language, death is the enemy. And so Jesus looks at the cemetery and he looks at Mary's face and he looks at the wreckage that death has brought into his world, and he is deeply moved by all of it. Because death is his enemy. This is not the first time, it's not the only time that death is the enemy in the Gospels. It's not the first or only time that the New Testament writes about death as an enemy. In fact, you can look at the entire ministry of Jesus and look at the whole story of what he does while he is here on this earth, and you see a pattern. He does not just teach people to cope with the problems of life. He does not just teach people to go through life like nothing is happening. He wages war on the brokenness of creation. You see him in his Gospels healing people who are sick. That's brokenness in creation that he's trying to destroy. You see him in the Gospels casting out demons. He's reclaiming territory from the powers. You see him in the Gospels forgiving sins. He's driving out the root of corruption from the very beginning. You see Jesus in the Gospel calming the storms. Creation was not supposed to have those. You see Jesus in the Gospel feeding the hungry who were supposed to have food anyway. You see Jesus in the Gospel raising the dead, because death is the enemy that Jesus confronts directly. That is the Jesus we see in the Gospels. Would you turn your Bibles over to Hebrews chapter 2 very briefly? Hebrews chapter 2. Death is the enemy. not make peace with it. Death is the enemy. His entire life, the life of Jesus, was about destroying death, destroying corruption, doing away with the wreckage that has found its way into this creation that God made to be so good, so very good. Doing away with the evil and the pain and the suffering and the heartache and the mourning and the tears, looking forward to a time where there will be no tears, where there's no reason to cry, where Jesus will no longer weep because the reasons for weeping are all gone. We look forward to that day, and Jesus, every day of his earthly life, was inching closer to that kind of world by casting out demons, by healing the sick, by feeding the hungry. That's what he did. And people hated him for it. I think you know the story of Jesus. He comes about doing good for all people, welcoming those who are unwelcome at the table, doing good for those that people hated. And a lot of people hated him for it. In fact, whenever he brings Lazarus from the grave, they decide they're not only going to kill Jesus, they want to kill Lazarus too. He becomes the target. Lazarus becomes the target of their death threats. They can't stand it. They want to get rid of all of it, all the evidence of Jesus. And so eventually that lands him on the cross. I don't know what you think about the cross, but the cross is not just a sin-removing transaction. The cross is a battle between light and darkness, between good and evil, between God and the adversary. And Jesus goes to the cross ultimately to defeat death. And the only way he's going to defeat death is by entering into it himself. He destroys death from the inside out. On the cross, Jesus is not there just to absorb punishment for somebody else's sin. He is there to beat Satan at his own game. This is Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. Since, therefore, the children share in flesh and blood, he himself, Jesus, he himself likewise partook of the same things. What same things? He became flesh and blood. That's what he says. Because we suffer, Jesus became flesh and blood to partake of the same things. That, here's the reasoning, that through death, he may destroy the one who has the power of death. That is the devil. And deliver all those who, through fear of death, were subject to lifelong slavery. Do you sometimes find yourself living your life in fear of the end? Probably not as a young person. But as the years pile up on us, and the rear view is probably a lot longer than what's in front of us, do you sometimes find yourself fearing death? And it grips you, and it holds you. And sometimes it keeps you from even doing things that you know that you should do and things that are good for you to do. That's a lifelong slavery to death. And in a lot of ways, that is the power that Satan holds over people today. Fear of death. It's an enemy. But what Hebrews chapter 2 is telling us is that Jesus came, became flesh and blood, so that he could destroy death. That's Hebrews 2. He became flesh and blood so that he could die and destroy death from the inside. Become victorious, Christ victorious over death. And so back in John 11, Jesus comes to the grave knowing that. He comes to the grave of Lazarus knowing how this is going to work, but he finds a weeping group of people here who are hurting, they're sad, they're heartbroken. And he weeps with his friends. All the while, he's angry at death. And what we know, that Mary doesn't know, and Martha doesn't know, and Lazarus doesn't know, and the mourners don't know, what we know is that in just a few weeks' time, the one who's weeping at this grave of Lazarus will enter his own grave, but he will not stay there. The mystery of John 11 is that Jesus weeps at this graveside, but in verse 25, 26, he also claims to be the resurrection and the life. He's weeping because of the people, but he knows that he's going to soon destroy death. This is the divine Jesus and the human Jesus. This is a clear picture of his divine nature, already knowing the outcome, and his human nature, suffering with people who were still struggling. And in case we miss it, that is us. This matters because it's good for us to know that we are not alone in our sadness. We don't want to talk about it. You don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about things that upset us. We want to act like it's all okay. It's not a big deal. We'll sweep that under the rug. And let's act like it never happened and go on about our lives, all happy-go-lucky as we ever were. We've lost the ability to be sad sometimes. We have lost the art of lament in our culture. But Jesus shows up and he says it's okay to be sad. And we are not alone in our sadness because the God of the universe has already been where you are. He has sat at the graveside and he has wept. He has been with the bereaved. He has been with those who are hurting. He has felt the weight of what death takes. He has dealt with the consequences of a distorted society, a distorted world. He has felt every emotion that humans feel. And so he can empathize with your weaknesses and with mine. We do not worship a God who is unmoved by human pain. We do not worship a God who doesn't care whenever we suffer. We worship a God who was moved enough to enter into our pain, to experience our pain when he could have avoided every bit of it. That's the God that we serve. The one who came to grieve with those who are grieving, the one who came to weep at a graveside, but a one who also came ultimately to enter the grave to destroy the power of death from within. Death is an enemy, but it is a defeated enemy. And so Paul can taunt death. In that great chapter, 1 Corinthians 15, he almost concludes the whole thing by saying, death, where is your sting? Where's your pain? Where's your power? Where's your victory? It's not there. Death still hurts. Death still is the enemy that we deal with. Ultimately, it has been defeated, but presently it still fights. And so yet we still deal with it. Death still pulls loved ones away from us, and we hate that. Death is the enemy. Death still ruptures families, and we hate that because death is the enemy. Death takes from us people that we have loved for a long time, and we don't act like it's no big deal anymore. Death is the enemy. Jesus comes and weeps with us at that death. Jesus wept at the grave, and Jesus was angry that death had a part in life. And those are two emotions that I want you to know it's okay for you to feel. You may have been told for a long time that we shouldn't weep. You may have been told that we shouldn't be sad because it's all going to be okay. Nobody told that to Jesus. He did not get the message because he weeps and he pushes back against death. So what difference does it make for us that Jesus weeps and then Jesus enters the grave himself to destroy death from the inside? What difference does it make to us? Well, could it change maybe what we are afraid of? Could knowing that Jesus has loosed the power of death in some way, could that change what we fear? If death is the last enemy, and it will ultimately be defeated at some point, then could it change what we fear? Fear is not going to disappear, right? Our grief and our sadness is not going to disappear. It is there, it's present. It's a human emotion. We're human people, and so we're going to feel human emotions. But it doesn't have the final word. And although that fear and that sadness may be present with us, should be present with us at times, it doesn't have to have power over us. It loosens the grip of its authority over us. Maybe Jesus coming and weeping at the graveside and Jesus entering the grave and coming out of the grave, maybe that can change how we grieve. Maybe it can change how we deal with a grief process. And what I mean by that is we don't breeze through it. We don't jump straight through grief and act like we're all okay when we're really not okay. What you see Jesus doing in John chapter 11 is grieving fully, honestly, feeling the emotion of grief that we don't like to do. Who does? But it's okay to do that. But grief also doesn't have the last word. Maybe, what happens in John 11 can give us some place to put our anger, where we don't make peace with the loss because something or someone was taken from us who was never supposed to be taken. This is a creation of life. Death is the enemy. And so Jesus may have been angry here, and we can be furious at death as well, as an enemy, as the wreckage in God's creation. Jesus saw death as the enemy and saw the devil as the enemy and fought back against their power in his life and the lives of those around him, and still fights against that power today. We live in the meantime. And the meantime is a difficult place to be. It's a mean time to be in, where we know the promises about death being the final enemy that's destroyed, but we experience it in this life. And so what do we do in the meantime? That's where we live. It's a hard question for me. What do we do in the meantime? I think we take heart and we take comfort in knowing that there is a God who loves us enough that he comes and he weeps with us. And he sits with us in our grief. And he listens as we cry out to him from our grief. And we take hope and comfort that one day there will be no reason for grief, no pain, and no sorrow, and no tears. Jesus wept. And if the language is right in Hebrews, he still weeps today. He still feels today what you feel. That's hard for me to get my mind around. It may be easy for you. It is hard for me to get my mind around that when I struggle, when I suffer, when I'm sad, when I'm upset, when I'm angry, that Jesus can still feel that. But there's comfort there in that Jesus wept and still weeps. The fourth thing I would leave you with is that sometimes there are things that need to die in our lives. Places in life where I'm holding things that I shouldn't hold, where I'm holding thoughts that I should not hold. Those need to go. Where I'm engaging in behaviors and actions that have no place in my life, those need to go. When I'm harboring deep feelings of resentment, those need to go. And so maybe this is not an invitation just to think about the comforting words of Jesus wept. Comforting they may be. But what should we be weeping for in our lives? Over in our lives? What has no place in my life, in your life? And what should I allow to pass on from my existence today? You may be here this morning and you're ready to become a Christian. You want to be baptized into Christ, which you're undergoing a reenactment of the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus, dying to self, dying to selfishness, buried, united with Christ, and coming out of the water to live a different kind of life. Maybe you're a Christian already. You still struggle with different things in your life. The invitation is always open to make the needed changes that you need to make. Jesus is with you, and Jesus is for you, and Jesus wants you as a part of his family.